Welcome to this edition of The Technology Pill, a podcast that looks at how technology is reshaping our lives every day and explores the extraordinary powers of governments and companies. My name is Gus Hossain, and I'm the Executive Director of Privacy International. And, as ever, today I'm here with Caitlin Bishop.
Hello!
Hopefully you're about to go on some kind of break, depending on where you are in the world. So we thought we would identify some of the interesting books we're taking with us, or books we've read this year that you may find interesting too. This is like the summer vacation version of the PI Insider, our mailing list that we set up recently that goes through the global news around the issues we work on.
We've got some colleagues joining us to take us through their recommendations, and we've listed the books they discuss in the description of this podcast, wherever you find it.
So as you'll see and hear, the PI staff are diverse in their reading and, how do we put it, quite well read, to be honest. They definitely raised the tenor of my reading list to some degree.
Some of them people will have met before from other podcasts, and maybe we'll also list those if you recognise the voice and you're not sure where from. Some of them you won't have met before, and we're very excited to introduce you to them. Now we're talking to Lucie, who's a legal officer from PI. She works across loads of our projects, and she is a data protection expert. Although I don't think she wants that title. She knows a lot about data protection, but I think she wants to keep it on the down low.
It being summer, it's a time where people are supposed to have time off, and I hope you will at some point. And people are often looking for things to read. I was wondering, first is to geek out. What would you advise for summer reading for a budding or old-time privacy advocate? But then also, what are you reading this summer in order to just escape?
Yes. So maybe I'll start with what I'm reading to escape.
That's a great, yeah.
I don't have any recent recommendations for good privacy books because I haven't read any in a while. So the sort of big book that I've brought with me this summer is A History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russel.
Wait, that's what you're reading to escape? That's your escape book. It's A History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russel.
That's exactly everyone's reaction whenever I mention it or they see it on my nightstand or something. That said, I think it's probably, for me, philosophy in general is probably the best escape route for anything. I've always loved philosophy. We study it at school in France. It's a whole thing. I studied it at uni a bit, and I've always loved it. It's the one way to both completely ground yourself in reality and completely detach yourself from it. And this one in particular, A History of Western Philosophy, is even better because it tells you the story of all these philosophers that think about crazy things and how their personal lives impacted their own philosophy. And it starts from the very, very, very first philosophers like Pythagore and all that stuff.
Wow.
And it goes all the way to today. And it's a really easy read. It doesn't sound like it, but it's a really easy read. It's like reading a
Bertrand Russell.
I read it in French.
He's a good writer.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
He's an excellent writer, and it's not written it's not a philosophy book. It's not going to be going into the depths of Kant's philosophy or something. It's really going to tell the story of philosophers and their society and people at the time and how they came to think the way they thought, which is just fascinating. And it's seriously a really good escape route.
This sounds amazing.
Pretty good.
I do have another escape book if you need something a bit more believable. So I think the other one I put down was, it's on my nightstand right now. It's called The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by John Le Carré.
Wonderful. Yes.
So I discovered John Le Carré when he passed away. I think it was last year. I actually didn't know about him, but I really love mystery books in general and spy books and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try that this summer. And apparently this one is his most famous, and I'm almost done with it, and it's just so good. It's it's one of those spy books that isn't really a spy book. It's more of a kind of psychological thriller and deep dive into one person's mind. It's really, really incredible. And that's a real escape one. And it really resonates with some of the work we do as well. When we, now that I work somehow with, on what secret services do and intelligence agencies do, I kind of really love reading those kinds of things. I'm like, maybe I shouldn't identify to you too much, and maybe I shouldn't admire you too much because you do bad things.
Lucie, before we lose you, can I just ask you about two other books you recommended based on the reading you've done this year? And I got to say, the reading you've done this year, the list that you gave us, just is fascinating. But there's two that you mentioned, which one is a French one about the wind. And the other is about the French fight to legalize abortion. I was wondering if you could just talk us through those.
Yeah, for sure. So the first one, which is La Horde du Contrevent, there's no English translation yet, so there's no official English name for it. So literally it means the Horde of the Counterwind. And it's a sci-fi book, but it's not a normal sci-fi book. As in, don't expect like Star Trek or Star Wars or things like that. It's, well, first of all, you start at page 700 and just go down to page 1 through the book. So it takes a few minutes to wrap your head around that when you start reading. The second weird thing is that there's symbols everywhere throughout the book that are used to like tell you who is speaking, what kind of position they are physically in the story. It's very, very, very strange. So I'd say it takes about 100 pages to wrap your head around how the book works, which is insane.
Oh my God.
But it's very cool. And so the story is basically this kind of like team of 30 people whose quest is to find the origin of the wind. And we're in this sort of parallel world where the wind is really strong and really hard to live with. And it's been going on like that for what we think is centuries. Everything is very cryptic in this book, so you can't really understand what time is, where things are. And yet it's very relatable, so you can totally imagine yourself there, and it's very close to our world with just these weird little quirks. And so this team of like really strong, intelligent people who each have a special sort of skill. They're not magicians or anything. It's all very sort of real, but each have a special skill. All team up together to try and go against the wind, up the world, against the wind, to find the origin of wind. It all sounds really up there, but it's incredible. And the great thing as well is that you switch from narrator to narrator. So you can have one paragraph that's narrated by one of the team members, then another one by another one. And so you really start to piece together the story from very, very different perspectives. And you really get into people's perceptions of their quest and of their world, and it's just incredible. And that would probably be the number one escape book if there was one to recommend. And I cannot wait for it to be translated to English so that my Anglophone friends can read it, because it's just so good.
That's your Christmas gift to everybody. I might even refresh my French. Just like, this sounds intriguing, but 700 pages of French for the first time since for 20 years. That would be quite a challenge.
And there's some invented words as well. Loads of invented words. So when I started reading it, I was like, God, have I lost my French this hard? All these words I don't remember. No, they're really just invented words.
The second book you recommended.
Yeah, so the other book, I think it's probably been translated to English. The translation I found online is The Right to Choose. In French, it's La Cause des Femmes, which actually means something very different. It means the women's cause, basically. And it's about Gisèle Halimi, who's a French-Algerian lawyer who was basically instrumental in legalizing abortion in France in the 70s. Because she started off by going to court, by defending women who had gotten abortions, i.e. unlawful abortions at the time, and trying to make the case that their getting an abortion was not because of, their own choice, but because they actually had no choice. And so in order to survive in society, they needed to get an abortion. And so that's how her fight to legalize abortion started, by these really individual cases of women who had suffered through so much, whose society had really let down, and who were forced into the situation of being pregnant. And she was trying to get them out of it through various uses of the law that basically criminalized abortion. But there were other laws that she was able to use to say, well, she didn't have a choice there. And that was all instrumental to building up the sort of public mindset around abortion and making people understand that abortion isn't choice and it should just be a right. And then abortion was legalized in 1975, but it was still very limited. So there were loads of conditions that you had to fulfill in order to get a lawful abortion. So unlawful abortions were still going on quite a lot. And she kept fighting until conditions kept dropping one at a time in order to get to full rights for abortion. And it was a fascinating read because it's written by her and it's written from her perspective on, how you build a rights movement and how it can take an entire person's life to get to one thing, to get to one law that will change everyone's lives. And it was just such a powerful read. Really loved it.
That sounds fascinating. Amazing. Gosh, I thought I had my summer reading.
It's a short read as well, so I would recommend.
Okay, phew. Okay, I thought I had my summer reading sorted, and now you've inspired me to consider more, and that's going to be challenging. I think I'll leave Bertrand Russel for the fall. Thank you very much for your time, Lucie. We really appreciate it.
Thank you both. It was lovely to speak to you.
Now we're being joined by Clara, who is responsible for our fundraising and digital campaigns.
Thanks for being with us today, Clara. What guidance do you have for all of us who are in dire need of a break? What do you have to tell us to read so we can escape?
Yeah, I feel like we all need that right now. So one of my big recommendations for kind of escapist books was a Ray Bradbury novel, which kind of unexpected given his sci-fi and kind of fantasy and some really deep stuff that he's written. But I came across this book called Dandelion Wine, which is kind of his coming of age novel, and it's full of nostalgia and it's set in 1928 Illinois. I was reading it and it kind of made me feel nostalgic for a time that I never really experienced, but it felt like the complete antidote to whatever is going on right now, like modern life. Yeah, it's a really beautiful poetic novel. Yeah, I highly recommend it.
I didn't know he wrote anything like that. Like Slaughterhouse 5 has an element.
That's Vonnegut.
That's Vonnegut. Oh my God, I totally got that
Ray
wrong.
Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah.
Which is like the classic.
Yeah.
Book burning-y one, right?
Yep.
That I
so
feel
for
like
him
I
to
read
write this kind of
as
book,
a teen.
Wow.
Like Fahrenheit 451 was the book you read when you wanted to be like cool and anti-establishment. So you read Fahrenheit 451 and you read like, all those books and you felt cool. But I remember it being like quite a poetic, prosy book, Fahrenheit 451. So his coming of age novel sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's super cool. Like, obviously, I'm not American. I didn't live in 1920s America, but the way that it's written is so beautiful and kind of almost spiritual. The protagonist is like a 12-year-old. I think Ray Bradbury wrote it kind of as himself, as like a 12-year-old, and it's this super cool 12-year-old just hanging out in summer and sort of grappling with the big concepts of like life and death and why are we here, but kind of set from like a child's mind. It's super fascinating and it's just this beautiful kind of summer novel.
Cool.
Yeah.
I love it.
We've had talks about books before, and I feel like you said that you don't read that much fiction.
No, I'm not really a fiction person, really. And my kind of other books that I've compiled for this recording, none of them are fiction apart from this one. And I don't really enjoy fiction in the same way that I enjoy nonfiction. I like to learn things as I read. Like if I'm going to spend my time reading, I want to learn something from it. But yeah, this book had a really profound kind of effect on me in terms of just being full escapism. Yeah, highly recommend it, even if you're not really a fiction reader.
Wow. I have to admit, like if I hadn't been able to travel back to North America this summer, right now as we're recording this, I'm visiting family in Canada. I would have probably had a hard time reading that book just because I've kind of avoided reading anything that is situated in Canada or in America because I've just been so homesick for so long. Actually, this sounds like a beautiful way to spend the next period here reading something like that.
Yeah, I felt very homesick for a time that I've never lived through. So I'm sure if you've experienced it, or small town America or small town North American areas, then I'm sure it'll make you very homesick, but in a good way.
And so what do you have for us that isn't fiction then?
A novel that I read, I don't know how recent it is, but it's by a journalist called Anna Merlan, called The Republic of Lies, American Conspiracy Theorists and Their Surprising Rise to Power. And it's this amazing kind of investigative work into the rise of modern day conspiracy theories, sort of the alt-right, QAnon, the anti-vax movement, and how it's become such a big movement in America and around the world. And it was one of those books that I just couldn't put down because it's such a new phenomenon, and it was cool to read someone going into these groups and trying to understand the origins and how this is being spread so rapidly and why people are latching onto these kind of concepts.
And is she able to capture, like, is this a new thing? Is this is the pandemic moment and the post-Trump moment a time where there was just so much kindling that it's a brand new fire that's never existed before, or is it a continuation of a number of fires over a period of time?
Yeah, so what she finds is that the way in which that these movements are growing is very new, given the rise in technology and advertising and the sort of small communities that pop up around the internet. But the theories themselves and the ideas themselves, sort of distrust and anti-establishment, these have been around for as long as there's been people in power. And so it's just the kind of logical conclusion, not logical conclusion, but the next logical step in those kind of movements now that the internet and technology have kind of caught up with them, and these movements have kind of latched onto the ways that they can spread and grow on the internet. But something I found really interesting in the book itself was that I thought it would be completely critical of all these movements, but the way that it's done is what I thought was really interesting is that she provides context for why certain groups of people perhaps are more prone to getting involved in these groups. And take, for instance, like the anti-vax movement at the moment. It's a huge movement around the world. I say movement like it's a collective, but like it's a huge idea around the world at the moment. And I thought it was really interesting that she decided to speak to people about why they are anti-vax, and a lot of the causes are because of things such as medical racism, medical misogyny, and the distrust that these establishments have caused these groups of people, which have led them to hold on to these kind of anti-vax beliefs. And I just thought it was really interesting because so many people kind of write that off as like crazy people, they're lunatics, but there are some, I found it kind of, I thought it was wonderful that she spoke to these people and understood. And I think that's a really helpful way to, I don't know, to understand these issues, is to understand the kind of the root cause as to why these people are prone to these kind of beliefs. I just thought it was interesting.
Oh man, this is another one I'm going to have to add to my list because as we've all had to spend time, we've had the fortune of being able to spend time with different people who we haven't been locked down with over the last period. So whether we're seeing friends or family we haven't seen for a while or spoken to, I'm having a lot of these conversations all of a sudden. Yeah. There was a situation where I was talking to a parent and a kid separately, where the parent was of one view and the kid was of another view when it came to vaccines. And by the time I was explaining individually the other side of the picture to each, I became a believer of both. And it was wonderful to see the melting of even the pro-vaccine views. Like, hold on, you put something in your veins that you had no idea what was going on just because somebody said that this was going to be trustworthy. And I was saying this to somebody who generally doesn't trust anybody. And you could see the mind start exploding, thinking, oh, why did I do this? And it's good to see people starting to question themselves. And maybe that's, healthy.
Yeah.
What was the third one?
So this is a book that I've read a few times now. It's called Tranny, Confessions of Punk Rock's Most Infamous Anarchist Sellout. And it's a collection of journal entries by the kind of punk singer Laura Jane Grace. And it's co-authored by Dan Ozzie. And it's about Laura Jane Grace's transition. So if you don't know, Laura Jane Grace is the frontwoman of a punk band Against Me, who've been around since like the early 2000s. And she transitioned in 2012 and now lives as a woman. And yeah, this book is a collection of kind of her journal entries from, I think, the 3rd grade. I don't know what age that is in UK ages, but she compiled this into a novel while she was going through her transition. And it's just a really fascinating look of someone growing up, like a really good growing up novel of someone struggling with their gender identity, being involved in a male-dominated area of music in the punk scene, becoming like famous in the punk scene, and then coming to terms with their gender identity and transitioning while in the public eye. And it's incredibly raw, it's funny, it deals with issues of gender identity, the concept of selling out in punk. Yeah, it's a really, really beautiful book, and it made me, I've read it a few times because it really stuck with me as one of these books that really helped me understand gender identity and the way that the feelings that people have around gender dysphoria and the kind of different iterations that can take.
She's really cool.
She's an incredible frontwoman, and the way that she expresses herself in this book is really funny and kind of brutal and says some really dark things. And it's just fascinating. It's a really, really interesting book if you're interested in music, anything to do with like any musical literature and gender identity as well.
Well, I actually don't even know the band, so I got a lot to do.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And again, my to-read list is getting so fucking long.
I'm glad I could recommend
exciting,
some good
but
stuff.
Thank you. Thank
you definitely have. So thank you very, very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank
No
you.
worries.
Now we're talking to Millie, who's a solicitor, a senior legal officer and research director, and leads our migration and civic dystopias work.
I listed a load of books I'm going to be reading, and I have a real problem with then finding something new. So one of the books I didn't tell you about is this woman called Gina Yashere, who's a comedian, and I heard her on the radio. Yeah. Oh my God, so enthusiastic, so funny. And I watched a whole load of her videos after listening to her being interviewed, and I thought, I've got to read this book. It's absolutely fascinating. And she talks, I think I'm going to get it right, about growing up, and her mum was very strict, and how after she left home she just went and did all the things she wasn't allowed to do. And she just tells such hilarious stories from her own memories and family and growing up. I think she's now based in New York. But yeah, I really want to read that now. I need a funny book. I haven't read a funny book for ages where you just sit there and laugh and everyone thinks you're mad. I love that.
Oh my God, you're right. I haven't. It's been ages. And yeah, do it on an airplane if you can. Just
on the tube where you can't control yourself. It's that good that you just, tears are coming. The other time I do it is when I listen to an audiobook on the way to pick up the kids. And I was listening to Emma Barnett's book. It's about bloody time. And there's so many things that you probably shouldn't, I don't know, we should be all speaking about it and not be embarrassed, but there are various bits where she's talking about people who she's nicknamed the Bloodhounds. Anyway, I'm not going to go into it. But
please do.
Okay, really? Oh my God, I can't believe this is the intro. So she is talking about how we need to sort of talk about people having sex on their period. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people love it. Some guys love it. They're the Bloodhounds. I think it's that. See? Oh. This is too much.
I should have known.
Catherine Ryan has a thing in her sitcom where she says, real men run red lights. That's what it is.
Oh, really? Great line.
It's a whole thing. Real men run red lights. And I remembered it because it really sticks with you.
Yeah, that stuff you don't forget. All the others. I actually, when I first heard about the book, I messaged Gus saying, you know, as executive director of an organisation which has a lot of women in it, apparently you should be reading this book. And I hadn't actually listened to it by that point. So Gus, you clearly haven't read it yet. It does have some very interesting stuff in it about, you know, making adjustments at work, should you or shouldn't you? Like, how do you deal with these issues? And she includes a lot of the disagreements between women on how you should deal with these things, and should you have specific leave related to it, or should you be very explicit that you can use sick leave for these issues, and it's encouraged. But it's a super fascinating book that just does a lot of work that should have been done years ago, and talks about how we should all be talking about these things more, but maybe not with your executive director.
I'll take this. Oh, yeah, I'm glad we've had this conversation before I read it based on your recommendation earlier. But yeah. Cool. What else do you have for us?
What else am I going to read? Weirdly, my gym has a book club, which I still haven't joined, but they've been recommending some really good books. And one of them is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I think most people are familiar with Viktor Frankl in relation to the Holocaust. And this book is incredible, and I can't believe I haven't finished it yet. But it's a very different consideration of being in that time, being held by certain individual people's. It's more people's reaction to being in that situation. And he talks about how other people who were held with him responded, and how some people just showed unbelievable kindness and compassion right to the end, where they may have been murdered or died, you know, during their detention. But then other people were more complicit as part of their survival mechanism. And it's really fascinating, his view on that. And it really, I constantly think, like, how would I have responded? Like, if suddenly you were being lined up for who's going to go and be murdered, would you be like shoving someone else forward? Would you be trying to avoid it? Like, it really makes you question it. So yeah, I think it's one of those books that you read and you could probably reread several times to really reflect on your own behavior as well as what happened then. It's
and that's
amazing.
So haunting. And that's the question I almost always ask myself. Like, how human am I?
Yeah, that's his question, see.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
It's not a long book. It's really a powerful one. So yeah, I want to sit down and properly finish that one and think about it and read it again.
And particularly as we start getting out again post-lockdowns and interacting with more people and dealing with situations that are well beyond our control. Oh, this sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
The human condition, geez. Sorry, what's the name of the book again?
It's called Man's Search for Meaning, I think.
Awesome.
You start with something funny and then take us through Bloodhounds and then here. Wow.
So one book that you can just sit down and read a book in one sitting, Shuggie Bain. Oh my God. I was there. Like, those books you read and you are on the outskirts of Glasgow. It's so amazing the way it just pulls you in there and again makes you think about someone's life that is so incredibly different from your own. It's just a fantastic read. It's hard going, I think, in some respects. I mean, I didn't find it that hard going. Other people I've spoken to, it took them a while to get into, maybe the first chapter. And whilst it might be bleak and depressing, it has uplifting aspects, and it's told in a way that is also amusing, and you are on the edge of your seat for a lot of it, and your sort of heart's in your mouth because you are rooting for the characters. That's what I love about this, is you are rooting for the characters, and you want the fairy tale ending, which doesn't always happen for everyone in it. And I think growing up in the UK, like, I don't know what it's like reading it as someone who didn't grow up in the UK, but you can picture it, you can see it, it takes you back in time, and there are twists in it in relation to certain characters and things that they do, and it makes you reflect on how the consequences of how people were treated and how people were raised, and that has then impact on later life decisions, and just some real tragedy in it. So serious tragedy. But yeah, God, it's formidable. So yeah, put that on your reading list.
Sorry, what's it called again?
Well,
Shuggie Bain. It won I can't remember which award. But yeah, when I was looking for new books, it was all over the papers. But yeah, it's brilliant, and it's one of those books where you then go and read interviews with the author because you're so fascinated. And that's also around the same time I read Such a Fun Age, which is a great book, but you're just really not rooting for any of the characters in that. They're all flawed. In some ways you support some of them, but then they all have bits about them. You're like, even though some of the characters in Shuggie Bain are really problematic, have problems themselves, you still like, life has not been fair to you. Like, I really want it to turn around somehow, but yeah, that's a great book. A short one, which is more of an essay. It was a recorded discussion. Do Humankind's best days lie ahead? That's another reread, and I've been meaning to read that for ages. And so it looks at, it says it in the name, like, are things better or worse now? And
who's it by?
It's a discussion between Pinker, Ridley, de Botton, and Gladwell, and I think it was hosted in Canada. And I've been meaning to buy it, to read it, and it's very quick to read, but you think you're on one side and then you switch, because I've started Pinker's book. What is it about the angels? Something. So many. I've had it as an audiobook too. I've listened to it, and it's so amazing. But then interesting for someone to reflect on the other side, and it is quite jokey, and because it's a discussion, it's not all written down. But so that's a really nice quick one. If you're going to see friends and family and you want to sound intelligent, have a quick read of that.
I feel like that's the premise of most of Malcolm Gladwell's work. But I feel like that's Malcolm Gladwell's main thing, is like, read his books, gain some facts, spit them out at other people, you sound intelligent. It's exactly the premise of his career.
Maybe I need a bookshelf of those kind of books. Quick read before you go and meet clever people. Then they'll probably be like, didn't you copy that from Malcolm Gladwell's book? It's not your original thought, but
Millie, thank you so much.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't have more notes on them to go through it, but yeah, anyway, you've got the list.
Thank you very much, Millie.
My pleasure.
You've given me much to do, giving us all much to do. Here's Laura, a legal officer from PI, who also leads our work on economic and social rights. So, Laura, you've been on vacation, and so you can maybe tell us what you read on, or if you have recommendations for others as they embark.
Yeah, so the book that I just finished reading is Pachinko by Minjin Lee. And it's a book by, I think, a Korean author, which outlines the story of a family as they migrate from what is now South Korea to Japan, Osaka, in the early 1900s, or in the mid-1900s. So it's a book that captures both the personal history of that family, but at the same time, the history and the tensions between Korea, later North Korea, South Korea, and Japan, and the hardships that Koreans and immigrants faced while living in Japan, even many, many generations after having moved in to Japan with their families.
Wow.
Ooh.
So early 1900s.
Yes.
Because that's fascinating, because that moment in history, too, because does it navigate the time pre-World War? Oh, my gosh.
Yes. And personally, I didn't know much about that side of the world in terms of World War I and II and what happens in between. So for me, it was strange to start with a story that clearly has Korean characters, but where the distinction between North and South Korea doesn't yet exist. It feels so unnatural and strange. And then basically understanding their experiences at the time when Japanese is involved in World War II. It's also different because you don't really think about Koreans as a community being deeply affected by the war, but they are, especially the ones who live in Japan. And they have to grapple with all series of obstacles, including discrimination. And it's a point of view that I had never before encountered. And I found it not just enlightening, but also very educating.
So that's nonfiction now, right? Or is it fiction?
It's fiction, but the story is centered around real historical events. So, for example, there is one particularly sad part of the book involves one of the characters being injured as a result of the bomb in Nagasaki because he was working in Nagasaki at the time. And so that it is historically accurate in that sense, but yet it doesn't purport to create a biographical study.
No, but that's my favorite kind of fiction, the ones that navigate history and give you, well, that's also why I like biographical stories, because it gives you a human story at the same time as telling the world events. Oh, that sounds great. Any book that tries to capture the challenge of a migrant identity, I think it's something I get lost in. I just love it. Okay, that's also going in that pile. Oh, good gosh. What else do you have for us?
So now that you've said that, I feel compelled to mention another book written by a migrant to the US, Ocean Vuong. So he's mostly a poet. He's Vietnamese American, and his debut novel is called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. And it still follows that thread of migrant family adapting to a foreign country. So he moves to the US, or rather he's born in the US, I believe, and he lives with his mom, who's illiterate, and his grandma. And basically they go as a family together through the aftershocks of the war between America and Vietnam.
Oh, gosh.
And it's told from such a personal, intimate point of view that it's not evidently political. But for example, something that the main protagonist struggles with is the fact that his mother and grandmother have been so traumatized by the war, which they lived through back at home, that he experiences a series of issues with his mom, who suffers from PTSD, and I think his grandmother does too. And so that makes the domestic situation particularly difficult. And in a way, the book itself is an ode to his mom and to his grandma because it's written in an epistolary fashion. So it's a series of letters that the author has written to his mother that he knows she will never read because she's illiterate, but that kind of go back and examine episodes of his childhood where he basically comes to terms with the fact that his mom had to face a lot of difficulties when she lived in Vietnam, and that the result of all of that is that he had to grapple with lots of violence growing up that he otherwise probably wouldn't have had to deal with. So it's this reckoning of the impact of the war and what personal effect that had on him, even though he didn't live through it himself.
Writing letters to somebody who won't read them. What a powerful storytelling. I don't even want to say device, because that makes it sound so simple. Mm-hmm. But oh my God, it's poetic at every single level. And the title of the book alone is just, it makes you want to buy it.
Yeah. And there's so much to unpack. It's a relatively short book, but every single chapter has so many different things. And I think it's also because it was written by a poet. So there's a lot of meaning to be gleaned from even simple sentences. So the way I've gone through it actually took me ages to read it because I had to pause after every single chapter and just ponder and go back through sentences because it felt as though the author was trying to convey some hidden meaning in his prose, and I was missing it, and I felt like I had missed something. And I'm like, is this meant to recreate the sort of intimacy that you have with family members? You know, those shared anecdotes or memories? It was a weird experience reading the book. I enjoyed it because it was just so different from what you usually read.
Wonderful. Okay. Unfortunately, that's going on the list as well. And it's short, but it takes a lot of time. Maybe that's a long plane ride for when those days return.
Yeah.
There was a list actually that we haven't really come to with anyone, which is if neither time or attention span were limitations, which book would you want to read?
Yeah, so for me, I have to say the answer is Bleak House by Charles Dickens. It's a book that I've often heard mentioned, and for context, I studied law, and obviously there are a series of books that are considered to be prime reading for anyone who wants to become a lawyer, because they not only inform your understanding of the profession, but also the moral strength behind it. And I know both of you will want to challenge me on this, and I'm not saying that there is any moral strength in the profession, but I will say that there's a lot of potential to practice a profession morally. And I've wanted to read it for a long time because I consider it relevant, but at the same time, I love Charles Dickens. I love his literature. The reason why I haven't really done it yet is because I know that Charles Dickens can make miracles, but the topic in itself sounds very boring. It's a family
that's embroiled in this legal battle that seems to never come to an end. And there are conflicting versions of the will. And there's this whole backstory, all the drama that usually follows the death of a person, and when there's anything to be gained for surviving family members. And obviously it specializes, or it looks into a very narrow area of law, which is probate law or chancery law, which isn't of particular interest to me, but I still feel that if Charles Dickens wrote something about the legal profession, and I am practicing in the UK, then I should definitely read this book. But I just never feel like I have the mental energy or even intellectual curiosity to get in there. It just feels like it'll bore me dry.
I've never made it through a Charles Dickens book.
That's exactly my point. I've never done it either. And so it would definitely go in that category of like, if time wasn't an issue. But people who have read it love Dickens. Laura, is there anything else you want to add to my pile, or was that your list?
I'd like to mention a final one because I think it's politically relevant these days, and basically has to do with my home country, Peru. And it was written by a Peruvian author, Alfredo Bryce Echenique. And the book is old. It was published in the 1970s, and actually I think 2020 marked its 50th year anniversary, which gave me an opportunity to reread it. The book is called A World for Julius. So Julius is a young boy born to a super aristocratic, upper-class Peruvian family. And through his eyes, you can understand the kind of racial divide and how socioeconomic status can affect your life as a modern-day Peruvian. And it's such a smart, kind of sharp social critique, despite the fact that it's being told through the eyes of the child. And the reason why I'm bringing this book up is that I recently watched the presidential speech of the new Peruvian president, Pedro Castillo, who was just sworn in less than a couple weeks ago. And this year marks 200 years since Peruvian independence, actually. So the 28th of July was our 200th independence anniversary. And it was a bit of a grim celebration because the candidate which won the elections at the end wasn't anyone's dream candidate, but also the other candidate that made it to the final round wasn't great either. So it was a bit of a depressing celebration. And some people didn't even celebrate at all, even though for many years people have been talking about their bicentenary anniversary. But so in his presidential speech, which was incredibly controversial, the new president mentioned the aftershocks of Spanish colonization and how we were living, the discrimination that modern day Peruvians are living through, the poverty, the extreme poverty that many people are surviving in Peru, that those are direct, or in a way indirect results from Spanish colonization. And so the lessons from the book, which if read before this recent presidential speech, would have felt really removed from Peruvian modern life, those lessons feel now very raw, especially relevant, considering that there's been an open recognition that Peru still hasn't healed from those wounds, that they still exist. So that's the final book that I wanted to add to the list, because I thought it was relevant for anyone interested in Peruvian history and wanting to have some sort of apolitical introduction to it. That's definitely a book that I would recommend.
Wow. And is this available in English, or is it?
Definitely. It's been around for a while, so it will have been translated.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's really cool. That's a great spot to end. It's just what I love about working at PI too. It's like there are just so many perspectives and the diversity. Like, so we started talking about French literature with Lucie, and I haven't read a French book in ages, and she's inspired me to do so. And then just recently with Millie, we were talking about an author writing around Glasgow. And throughout, we're getting all these stories from our colleagues talking about what it is to live life in these environments that these books are telling stories about. But to end in Peru, that's not a place I thought that I would read about. And you definitely have inspired me to do that. Thank you so much, Laura.
Oh, you're welcome. But there is a motion picture coming out about this book.
Oh, don't ruin it. I would wait for that.
It was announced last year, I think, as part of the 50-year anniversary of the book. I hope it's great.
Okay. I'll only watch it after you give me a recommendation.
Yes. Good. That's the way it should be.
And I'll try to find a version of Bleak House that we can all watch together someday. And when the office reopens.
Movie night. Nice.
Yes, indeed. A Dickensian movie night.
Love it.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to all of our colleagues at PI for their wonderful suggestions.
Remember, you can find all of the books we talked about in the description of whatever platform you're using. If that platform is particularly unwieldy or the description is very long and intimidating, then we should have, hopefully, a well-formatted list available on our website, privacyinternational.org.
And just as ever, you can like and subscribe to the podcast on all those various platforms that you may use. And just as Caitlin has said, it's also available on our website at privacyinternational.org. Generally, I'd recommend you come to our website regularly and sign up to our mailings. I feel like we're missing a hey, have a good vacation.
Yeah, have a good vacation. Enjoy it. Even if it's a at-home staycation, I hope you have a lovely one. And it's peaceful and you get a break, because I think everyone needs one.
And you get time to read.
Yeah.
And hopefully we didn't put your bags make them too heavy to go through whatever airport you may hopefully be traveling through.
Take them over the weight limit.
Thanks, everyone. Music is courtesy of Sepia. This podcast is produced by Max Burnell for Privacy International.